Kale wandered through the corridors of Arcturus 7, trying not to look like a lost human tourist, though he failed spectacularly. The station stretched on in endless loops of silver and chrome, neon signs flickering with alien scripts that blinked and shimmered in a dozen colors he didn't have names for. Somewhere above, the hum of anti-gravity engines mixed with the distant chatter of merchants haggling in languages he couldn't understand. He muttered under his breath, "Why did I think volunteering for interspecies diplomacy would be fun?" And immediately tripped over a hovering crate that seemed to float like it had a mind of its own. "Careful, human," said a voice behind him, smooth and melodic, tinged with something that made him almost forget to breathe. He turned and froze. She was standing there, perfectly still, the kind of still that looked deliberate and dangerous in the best possible way. Her skin caught the light in faint iridescent patterns, and her eyes, he swore he could see stars in them, studied him with an amusement he wasn't sure he could handle. And then there were the ears, long, elegant, sweeping backward like some subtle statement of otherworldly elegance. He tried to recall if any human mythology had anything about ears like that. Nothing helpful came to mind. Hello," he said, his voice cracking in the way humans apparently did when confronted by someone utterly mesmerizing. "I mean, greetings, standard diplomatic greetings." He waved a hand vaguely in what he hoped was a non-threatening manner. She smiled, faint and teasing, a tilt of her head that suggested she enjoyed the confusion she caused. "Kale, isn't it?" she said. Her voice carried a vibration that seemed to make the air shimmer slightly. "I've heard of you." "Oh, that's reassuring," he said, wishing he could disappear behind the nearest crate which, as luck would have it, had drifted into his path again. He bumped into it hard. It floated lazily backward as if mocking him. She laughed. It was soft, musical, not cruel, but it made him want to stumble even more. "You humans are clumsy in zero-G," she said. "Have you considered training with the station's simulators?" "Training me? I can barely keep my coffee from floating away in the cafeteria," he admitted, his hands flailing in an attempt to steady himself. A small holographic cup of something warm and green levitated past his shoulder. He ducked instinctively. "Perhaps I can offer a more personal tutorial," she said, stepping closer. He noticed her movements were effortless, graceful, controlled, like she was always aware of the subtle currents of gravity and air that he didn't even perceive. I'd be honored," he said, the words tasting strange and foreign in his mouth. Then, as if to fill the unbearable silence, he added, "You'd make a good, wife." He almost slapped himself the second the words left his mouth. He tried to correct himself. "I mean, a good partner, a diplomatic partner, yes. Definitely diplomatic." Her head tilted, that faint, teasing tilt that made his heart hammer. She leaned slightly closer and her voice dropped to a whisper that seemed intended just for him, though the corridor was empty. "Then make me yours." Kale blinked. He was sure the stars above the station had paused for a moment. He stepped back, tripped over his own foot, and nearly collided with a passing hovercart loaded with glowing fruits from Vega 9. She caught him before he fell, her hands light on his shoulders, steadying him with an elegance that contrasted violently with his flailing limbs. "Smooth, human," she said, her lips quirking in amusement. "Very smooth." I meant it diplomatically," Kale sputtered, flailing again, this time gesturing vaguely toward the glowing corridor walls as if they could back him up. "Totally formal, absolutely non-romantic, very official." "Of course," she said, though her eyes twinkled with mischief. She released him and stepped back, letting him regain his balance while maintaining a gaze that made him feel simultaneously seen and exposed. He swore the small stars reflected in her eyes winked at him. He swallowed and tried to speak again, but only managed a dry laugh. "You make this, zero-gravity socializing really difficult." "I imagine," she said lightly, "that humans are rarely this entertaining in my presence." She gestured to a nearby hover platform. "Shall we continue before you embarrass yourself further with the flora vendors?" Kale hesitated, then, with the subtle grace of someone trying not to topple a model spacecraft, stepped onto the platform. It lifted him smoothly, tilting slightly as if to test his balance, and he waved awkwardly at a nearby group of xenologists who were staring at him. She followed on foot, her own movement so effortless it almost seemed like she was gliding. As they drifted along the winding corridors, she teased him relentlessly, pointing out his attempts to navigate with a translator device that insisted on translating every word into 10 unnecessary synonyms. "Why use one word when you can use 5, Kale?" she asked, as a holographic map projected between them, spinning lazily like a mini galaxy. "Efficiency is overrated," he said, though the words were swallowed by the laughter that bubbled up at his own ridiculousness. The sound of her laugh mingled with the hum of the station, and for a moment, Kale forgot that he was a human in a universe that might be hostile or indifferent or both. All that mattered was the way her ears tilted subtly when she laughed, the shimmer of her eyes, and the thrill of not knowing if he'd somehow just stepped into the most dangerous and fascinating situation of his life. They paused at a junction where the corridor split in 3 directions. Kale's platform hovered unevenly. He gestured at the paths like he knew which one to take. Left or center, I always pick the wrong one in these things." "You always pick the wrong one?" she asked, amusement plain in her voice. "I am not surprised, humans and their charming chaos." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said, though he had no idea what he was complimenting. "Right." "You may," she replied, lightly touching a hand to the floating map to redirect its projection, "but only if you survive the next corner without flinging yourself into the replicator bay." Kale looked at her, caught somewhere between admiration, terror, and something dangerously like desire. He almost didn't notice the floating fruit cart that had drifted back into their path. He swore it winked at him too. And then she said, quietly, just for him, "You might be more capable than you think, human, or at least more entertaining." He laughed, a short, incredulous burst, nearly losing his balance again. He realized that for the first time since he'd arrived on Arcturus 7, being clumsy, awkward, and entirely human didn't feel like a liability. Somehow, with her presence, it felt like the beginning of something unexpected, maybe dangerous, definitely thrilling, and entirely unavoidable. The corridor stretched ahead, winding, glittering, humming, and Kale followed, because what choice did he have? His feet or the anti-gravity platform might fail him at any moment, but somehow he didn't want them to. Kale followed Lysara out of the winding corridors of Arcturus 7, stepping onto a transit pad that shimmered with a faint blue light, lifting them gently above the station floor. He tried not to panic as his boots hovered slightly above the metal surface, each step a careful negotiation with physics he barely understood. Lysara walked beside him, her long ears tilting just so, catching every faint vibration in the air, and he had to remind himself she wasn't observing the station. She was observing him. "So," she said casually, "have humans always struggled this much with basic gravity adjustments?" Her tone was teasing, and Kale could almost hear the laughter in her words before she even smiled. I prefer the term chaotically adaptable," Kale said, adjusting his weight as the transit pad tilted slightly. "It's strategic, very tactical actually." She tilted her head, that mischievous curve of her ears flicking slightly, and for a moment Kale felt like a child being examined by a cosmic feline. "Strategic, then let us test your tactical prowess." She pressed a small button on the pad's control panel, and the platform lifted higher, tilting into a gentle arc that aimed them toward the orbital gardens, a sprawling biome suspended in a zero-G dome. Kale's stomach lurched. "Test my tactical prowess? I have a feeling your definition of test involves me breaking something important." "Perhaps, or perhaps it involves something far more entertaining." She grinned, the faint iridescence of her skin catching the light like a distant nebula, and Kale realized that trying to appear confident in her presence was like trying to catch a comet in a jar. When they arrived, the garden stretched out in impossible geometry. Floating pathways winding through luminescent flora, suspended pools with fish that glowed faintly as they swam through the air, and small drones buzzing gently to pollinate the alien plants. Kale tried to take it all in while avoiding stepping onto a floating petal that twirled unpredictably. He misstepped, flailed, and almost collided with a hovering hibiscus the size of a small moon. Lysara's hand shot out, steadying him effortlessly. "You really are entertaining," she said, her voice carrying that playful lilt that made him forget which part of the galaxy he was in. "I aim to provide comic relief in tense interspecies encounters," Kale said, trying to regain his balance. "It's a skill very underrated." Lysara raised an eyebrow, or rather, tilted her long ear in a way that suggested disbelief. "Comic relief is indeed rare in your species. Mostly it's chaotic panic or existential despair. You apparently combine both with finesse. Kale swallowed, feeling heat rise to his face, or what passed for a face flush in zero-G. Well, I do try, it's part of my charm. They drifted along the glowing pathways, Lysara occasionally brushing her hand against a floating vine, sending sparks of bioluminescence scattering across the air. Kale noticed how her fingers moved, precise yet fluid, and he found himself mesmerized by the ease with which she navigated the zero-G garden. He, on the other hand, bounced slightly off a hovering platform, nearly tipping into a pond of glowing jellyfish-like creatures. "Careful, human," she said, suppressing a laugh. "Those creatures are quite delicate, though I suspect they might find you amusing." "Amusing," Kale echoed, flailing in a way that sent him spinning gently before Lysara's hand shot out again. He realized she wasn't just steadying him, she was guiding him, her touch both firm and teasing. "Am I a new attraction for your local fauna?" "Possibly," she said, letting a faint chuckle escape. "Though I imagine the intergalactic gossip would focus more on the human who nearly destroyed half the garden trying to walk like a graceful biped." Hale laughed, a nervous, shaky sound that floated in the zero-G air. "I call it interpretive movement." He tried to sound dignified but ended up kicking a floating orb that hummed and changed color in protest. See, cultural contribution. Lysara shook her head, though her smile widened. "You are impossibly human." They moved further into the garden, winding along pathways that twisted around pools of luminescent liquid, where small robotic pollinators hummed softly as they danced from plant to plant. Kale watched, fascinated, and then tripped again, this time against a plant that seemed to respond to his touch, curling and uncurling like it had a personality of its own. "You're lucky the garden is forgiving," Lysara said. "Most humans would have triggered a security protocol by now." "I thrive under pressure," he said, attempting to straighten up, though the phrase felt like a lie with every wobble. "Very resilient, very humanly resilient." "Resilient," she echoed, amusement clear. "I suppose there's a charm in unpredictability." Her ears flicked slightly as she looked at him, the corner of her lips twitching in that teasing way he was starting to find dangerously attractive. They paused at a clearing where gravity seemed to fluctuate slightly, and Kale found himself floating just a few inches above the ground. "This is fine, totally fine. I always dreamed of being an airborne human." "You do realize," she said, glancing at him, "that humans tend to panic when suspended a few inches above alien terrain." I do panic gracefully," he said, "mostly." He tried to laugh it off, but the vibration made him float slightly higher. She extended her hand and without touching him subtly adjusted the local gravity, setting him back down. Kale blinked. "How did you?" "Control," she said simply. "A little discipline and a little trickery, mostly discipline." Her ears flicked again, a faint shimmer running across them. "You humans often underestimate subtlety." I think I might be learning that," he said, more honestly than he intended. He watched as she moved among the floating plants, her movements precise, elegant, almost hypnotic. "Though I suspect I'll spend the rest of my life tripping over every advantage I'm given." She smiled, watching him with interest. "Then I shall enjoy your interpretive dance for as long as I can. Though I must admit, your chaos is oddly charming." Kale laughed again, a genuine laugh this time, as a small, floating fruit orb bounced off his shoulder. "Oddly charming," he echoed. "I could get used to that as a compliment." They drifted further into the gardens, talking, teasing, and occasionally colliding with harmless floating flora. The combination of her effortless grace and his fumbling, chaotic energy created a strange rhythm, a back and forth that was both exhilarating and humorous. For every misstep he made, she responded with amusement and gentle correction, never condescending, always playful. As the sun, or what passed for a sun in the dome, shifted, bathing the gardens in soft, multicolored light, Kale realized he wasn't merely surviving the encounter. He was thriving in a way he hadn't anticipated, swept along by the humor, the beauty, and the subtle thrill of the unknown. "Perhaps humans are more capable than I suspected," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Or perhaps I simply enjoy observing chaos in motion." Kale smiled, letting himself drift lightly above the path. "I'll take either explanation," he said, "though I think I prefer the one where you enjoy watching me." Her laughter followed him as they continued, soft and musical, blending with the hum of the garden, and Kale realized that being awkward, human, and entirely out of his element had never felt this alive. Kale followed Lysara through the winding corridors of the station once more, though this time the familiarity of the metal and neon seemed less intimidating. He had learned the rhythm of anti-gravity pads, the quirks of floating crates, even the unpredictable behavior of stray fruit orbs, and somehow, despite everything, he felt less like a clumsy human in a galaxy of effortless aliens, and more like someone who belonged in the middle of chaos. Because Lysara was there, laughing alongside him, always just a step ahead. Her quarters floated above the station's main hub, a suite of glass panels, softly humming energy conduits, and holographic interfaces that shifted in response to her gestures. Kale stepped carefully through the doorway, immediately tripping slightly on the threshold before catching himself. I promise this isn't how I normally enter rooms, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Lysara's ears flicked in amusement. I have no doubt, she said, her voice low, musical, and full of teasing. But I rather enjoy it, the unpredictability suits you. The room was a gravity-controlled marvel. Furniture hovered gently in midair, soft light emanated from floating panels, and the view of the galaxy beyond the transparent walls made everything feel both intimate and infinite. Kale wandered slowly, touching a floating artifact that hummed in response, making a soft melodic tone that startled him into a laugh. You humans are endlessly fascinated by the simplest of stimuli, Lysara said, leaning casually against a floating console. Yet it is charming to watch. I like things that hum, Kale said, shrugging sheepishly, watching the artifact float around his hand as if acknowledging his presence. And I like things that make me laugh, you're full of both. Her eyes glittered with amusement, and Kale found himself drawn toward her despite the residual fear of tripping over floating furniture. I must admit, she said, stepping closer, you handle yourself remarkably well for someone entirely untrained in zero-G etiquette. I try, Kale said, realizing that words were both helpful and insufficient. Mostly I just survive, somehow, and occasionally entertain. Lysara chuckled softly, the sound blending with the gentle hum of the room. You do more than survive, she said. You make presence a performance, and that is rare. I find it intriguing. Her hand hovered in the air for a moment, then she gestured, and the local gravity shifted subtly, setting Kale's feet more firmly on the floor as if rewarding his efforts. I'm glad you think so, he said, smiling despite himself. Though I imagine most aliens would just report me for reckless behavior. Most aliens would be boring, she said lightly. You are not boring. Her ears twitched slightly, a subtle signal he was learning to interpret. Amusement, curiosity, a hint of something warmer beneath the playful veneer. Kale realized then that his journey from fumbling human to slightly more competent intergalactic companion wasn't about mastering zero-G or alien etiquette. It was about being present, genuine, and willing to step into the unknown without pretending to be anyone but himself. You've changed since we first met, Lysara said, her voice softer now. Or perhaps you simply stopped pretending to be anyone other than human. Either way, it is refreshing. Kale felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with gravity or artificial light. I think I've learned a lot, he admitted. About gravity, about alien plants, about myself. He hesitated, glancing at her. And maybe about what it means to connect with someone different. Lysara's smile widened, a slow, deliberate curve of lips and ears. Different is often underestimated, she said. I am glad you are here, Kale. You may find, despite the universe's vastness, that some connections are inevitable. Kale laughed, shaking his head. I'd have said improbable, but inevitable sounds better. He took a cautious step closer. Especially when the other person is this extraordinary. Her eyes sparkled, and for a moment the galaxy beyond the walls seemed to pause. You may speak freely, human, she said. I do not require ceremony or protocol, only honesty. He struggled, then let it out in a breath. I like being with you. I like how unpredictable everything is when you're around. I like you. Her laughter, soft and musical, resonated through the suite. And I like how utterly human you are, Kale, reckless, chaotic, amusing, and strangely endearing. Perhaps we should explore this further. Kale blinked, his heart racing. You mean like together? He gestured vaguely to the floating artifacts, the hovering furniture, as if the room itself might testify against him. Precisely, she said, stepping closer, her long ears flicking as if each movement was part of a delicate dance. Together, he laughed, nervous and elated, and this time he didn't trip. Instead, he floated lightly toward her, adjusting to the gravity she subtly controlled. They moved among the hovering furniture, brushing past glowing artifacts, laughing at his occasional missteps, teasing each other effortlessly. The humor that had lightened every tension-filled moment now became the rhythm of their connection, playful and genuine, bridging human and alien worlds. Hours passed, though Kale had no sense of time, caught between awe, laughter, and the quiet thrill of intimacy. She guided him gently through subtle gravitational adjustments, playful nudges, and teasing remarks, showing him that connection required both trust and courage. And he responded, fumbling yet sincere, learning that being human, chaotic, clumsy, earnest, was enough when paired with someone willing to meet him halfway. As the station outside moved on its orbit and distant stars winked against the black void, Kale realized he had grown in ways he never anticipated. He was still awkward, still prone to missteps, but he was no longer just surviving the universe. He was navigating it with laughter, curiosity, and a companion who made the unknown feel like home. "You have changed me," Lysara said quietly, her voice softening in the way that made his chest tight. "Not in ways you may expect, but fundamentally. I am glad you stumbled into my corridor that day, human." Hale chuckled, feeling the weight of the statement and the warmth of its truth. "I think I've changed too. I might even say I'm better for it, though I suspect you'd still catch me if I fell." "I always will," she said, and for the first time Kale believed her completely. They stood there side by side, surrounded by floating light and humming artifacts. A human and an alien, two entirely different beings who had discovered a connection neither of them had anticipated. Laughter mingled with quiet reflection, chaos harmonized with elegance, and in the endless expanse of the galaxy they had found a small orbit of certainty, each other. Kale smiled, his fingers brushing hers. "So this is how it begins." "This is how it begins," Lysara said, tilting her head and smiling, long ears flicking as though in agreement with some cosmic rhythm. And with that, the galaxy continued to spin around them, indifferent yet beautiful, while two very different lives intertwined with humor, grace, and the kind of unexpected love that could only exist in a universe wide enough to hold both stars and human hearts.